snow still clung to the roofs of Ashford when a sound broke the silence. Not a bark, but a trembling whimper, fragile yet determined. Inside a cracked wooden crate, beneath the rain, lay a soaked German shepherd pup no one was meant to find. A battle-worn veteran stopped his truck, drawn by that single cry. He didn't know it yet, but this voice would echo through his nightmares, through his healing, through his life. This isn't just a story about rescue. It's about how love learns to speak again, even after war, even after loss. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe that every wounded soul deserves a second chance, hit subscribe, share this story, and let's remind the world that sometimes miracles arrive on 4 muddy paws and a whisper that refuses to fade. The storm came early that winter, rolling down from the northern hills before the town of Ashford had even finished its Christmas decorations. By nightfall, the streets were empty, and the wind drove sheets of rain sideways against the windows. Arthur Dawson sat in his pickup at the edge of town, engine idling, wipers struggling to keep up. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. He should have been asleep hours ago, but sleep hadn't been kind in years. He stared out at the rain, the bottle of sleeping pills on the seat beside him unopened. The doctor at the VA had called them gentle aids. Arthur called them white lies in capsule form. He rubbed his temple, jaw tight. Every time he closed his eyes, the same vision came. The flash, the sand, the voice, screaming his name through static. Down, Dawson. Valor. And then silence, like the world had swallowed the sound whole. Valor. That name still lived in his chest like a stone. His canine partner, a sable German shepherd who had served beside him in Afghanistan for 3 years. Valor had once dragged him out from under twisted metal after an explosion. A month later, another blast came, and this time the dog had been the one who didn't come back. Arthur hadn't been the same since. PTSD, the doctors said. Soul shock was how he described it. The rain hammered harder. He reached for the ignition, ready to turn back toward his cabin on the hill, when something faint cut through the drumming, a whimper. At first, he thought it was memory playing tricks again, but there it was, high-pitched, fragile, carried on the wind. Arthur frowned, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out into the storm. The air was cold enough to bite. He followed the sound past an abandoned lumber warehouse, the mud sucking at his boots. The beam of light caught on a pile of wooden crates half collapsed near the fence. The sound came again, weaker now. He knelt, pushing aside splintered boards. Inside one of the crates was a small shape huddled in straw, soaked to the skin. A puppy, no more than 4 months old, with fur the color of tarnished gold and black along the spine, shivering violently. Its ribs showed beneath the wet coat, eyes wide with terror. "Easy, easy there," Arthur murmured. His voice cracked from disuse. The puppy didn't move. He reached out slowly, letting it sniff his hand. The animal flinched, then whimpered again, not in fear, but exhaustion. Arthur lifted it carefully, wrapping it in his flannel jacket. The tiny body trembled against his chest, heartbeat fluttering fast as a trapped bird's. "Well, looks like it's just us, huh?" he whispered. The drive back felt longer than usual. The wipers squeaked in rhythm with his thoughts. By the time he reached his cabin, a weathered one-story house tucked among pines, the storm had turned to icy rain. Inside, he set the puppy down by the fireplace and lit kindling. The flames caught, filling the room with soft orange light. The cabin was sparse, a table with 1 chair, a couch, an old military duffel half unpacked near the door. On the wall hung a photograph, a younger Arthur in uniform beside a German shepherd wearing a service vest marked Valor. He looked at it for a moment, then away. The puppy's teeth chattered audibly. Arthur found an old towel, dried it as best he could, and placed a bowl of water nearby. The dog sniffed but didn't drink, eyes fixed on him. There was something in its gaze. Not quite trust yet, but the fragile beginning of it. "You shouldn't be out there alone," Arthur said quietly, sitting cross-legged by the fire. "Neither should I, probably." The dog tilted its head, a droplet of water sliding off its snout. Then it made a sound, a soft, low hum in its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a whine. It vibrated faintly through the floorboards, almost like a reply. Arthur blinked, startled. What was that? The dog did it again, eyes locked on his. The sound was steady this time, comforting in a way words couldn't be. Arthur exhaled, a rough laugh escaping him. "You talk too, huh?" He tore a piece of leftover bread, dipping it in warm milk before setting it down. The dog sniffed, then began to eat in small, desperate bites. Arthur leaned back, watching the firelight dance across the walls. The rhythmic hum of rain outside mixed with the faint sound of the pup's breathing. For a moment, he forgot the sand, the noise, the ghosts. When the animal finished eating, it circled twice before curling up near the fire. Arthur spread a blanket over it, noticing the faint scar circling its neck, a thin, pale line beneath the fur. He frowned. "Someone tied you up," he murmured. The thought tightened his chest. The pup shifted, letting out a short sound that almost resembled a sigh. Arthur reached down, resting his palm gently on its back. The small body tensed, then relaxed beneath his hand. He could feel the heartbeat slowing, sinking with the rain. "You're safe now," he whispered. For the first time in months, maybe years, the cabin didn't feel hollow. He sat there until the fire burned low, the dog's breathing steady beside him. When he finally rose to turn off the lamp, the sound came again, that low, resonant hum. Arthur paused, smiling faintly. "Yeah, I hear you." He glanced one last time at the photograph of Valor, then at the sleeping pup. The ache in his chest felt different tonight, not gone, but softened, like an old wound finally learning how to close. He whispered, almost to himself, "Guess I wasn't meant to be done yet." Outside, the storm eased into silence. Inside, for the first time in a very long time, Arthur Dawson slept without dreaming of war. The storm had passed, but the world outside still looked half-drowned. By morning, Ashford's streets glistened under a pale gray light, puddles reflecting the empty sky. Inside the cabin, the fire had gone out, leaving only the faint warmth that lingered on old bricks. Arthur Dawson stirred awake in his armchair, stiff from sleeping there. His jacket had slipped halfway to the floor, and on top of it, curled in a small ball of fur, lay the pup. It was still asleep, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. For a moment Arthur just watched, unsure what to feel. It had been years since another heartbeat shared his space. He poured himself coffee, the bitter smell grounding him. The pup stirred at the sound of the mug against wood. It yawned, a tiny pink tongue flashing, then let out a low rumble, that same strange, wordless sound from the night before. Arthur frowned, half amused, half unsettled. "You talk in your sleep too, huh?" The dog blinked at him, tail giving one uncertain thump. By noon, Arthur had found an old leash and a towel. He wasn't sure what to do next. Keeping the animal wasn't the plan. He didn't even keep plants alive. Still, he couldn't just leave it hungry. He filled a bowl with oatmeal and a bit of milk. The pup sniffed, tasted it, and wagged its tail like it was the best meal in the world. When the rain eased, Arthur decided to walk into town, mostly to see if there was a vet. The leash felt foreign in his hand. As they walked down the gravel road, the puppy trotted beside him, occasionally bumping into his boot like it wanted to match pace. The town of Ashford wasn't much. 2 blocks of brick buildings, a hardware store, a diner, and a post office that still smelled of paper and dust. The veterinary clinic sat near the edge, a small white house with a blue door that read Taurus Animal Care. A chime rang when Arthur stepped in. The scent of antiseptic and hay filled the air. Behind the counter, a young woman looked up from her notes. She had warm olive skin, dark hair tied loosely, and eyes the color of fresh coffee, alert but kind. "Hi there," she said, voice carrying the soft rhythm of someone raised around both animals and people. "Walk in?" Arthur nodded. "Found him last night out by the lumber yard. Thought someone might be looking for him." The woman came around the counter. "Let's take a look." She knelt, and the pup pressed itself close to Arthur's boot. "Scared," she murmured, reaching slowly. Her touch was careful. Back of the hand first, then fingers under the chin. The puppy relaxed a little, sniffed her sleeve. "You're okay, little one. You made it through the storm." Arthur watched her. "You new around here?" She smiled. "Moved from San Antonio last month. Maya Torres. Used to work with rescue animals for the Army Veterinary Corps." Arthur raised a brow. "Military?" 4 years, she said. Hesitated, then nodded once. 22. Infantry. Lost my partner out there." Her eyes softened. "Dog?" He gave a single nod. Name was Valor. For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt heavy but not uncomfortable, like 2 soldiers who didn't need to explain what the other already knew. Maya examined the pup's neck, parting the fur gently. "See this line?" she said, pointing to a faint scar encircling the throat. "That's from a training collar. Not abuse. Conditioning. Someone was teaching him commands, probably for work duty." Arthur frowned. "Like military K-9? "Possibly, or police. He's got shepherd genes, strong bone structure, and alert eyes." She smiled faintly, rubbing behind the pup's ear. "But I think he's been on his own for a while, malnourished, frightened. Yet he still trusts people. That's rare." Arthur crouched beside them. The pup looked at him, tail twitching hesitantly. "Does he have a chip?" Maya scanned him, but the reader stayed silent. "No ID. No owner in the registry." She looked up. "You planning to keep him?" Arthur rubbed his jaw. "Didn't plan on finding him." Maya's smile was small, knowing. "Sometimes they find us first." She handed him a paper bag with antibiotics and puppy food. "Feed him well, warm bedding, quiet nights. He's been through something, but he'll come around." Arthur met her gaze for a second longer than he meant to. There was no pity there, only understanding. "Thanks, Doc." Outside, the air was cold and clean. The pup trotted ahead, leash slack. As they reached the truck, Arthur muttered, "You heard that? She said you found me." The pup let out a low rumble, soft, melodic. Arthur chuckled. "Guess you agree." That night, the cabin felt different. The shadows were gentler, the silence less hollow. The pup followed him everywhere, from the kitchen to the chair by the fire. When Arthur finally sat down, he opened an old tin box on the table. Inside lay Valor's service tag, still dented from the blast. He turned it over in his palm, tracing the letters. "You'd have liked this one," he said quietly. "Got the same stubbornness." The pup tilted its head, then let out a low hum, that same chest-deep vibration that felt like it came from somewhere ancient. Arthur looked at him, startled again. "You really do talk, don't you?" He placed the tag on the table beside the sleeping dog. The 2 pieces of metal, Valor's tag and the pup's new collar, glinted side by side in the firelight. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window. Arthur's eyes fluttered shut. Sleep crept in slow and uncertain. Then came the dream. Sand, smoke, the deafening ring of memory. He was back in the desert, trapped under rubble, breathing dust. A voice shouted, "Valor, get back!" Then the explosion, the sound of pause, the whimper that never left his mind. He jerked awake, drenched in sweat, chest heaving. Across the room, the pup stirred, ears twitching. It whined softly, then padded to Arthur's side, resting its head on his trembling hand. The sound came again, that low, resonant tone. This time it was steady, like a heartbeat not his own. Arthur exhaled shakily. "It's okay," he whispered. "Just a dream." The dog stayed where it was, pressing closer. The trembling faded. The silence felt alive again, filled not with ghosts, but with something breathing, waiting, and real. He looked down at the pup, whose eyes were half closed but watchful, like it knew. "You're not Valor," Arthur murmured, "but maybe you're what's left of him." He reached out, hand resting gently on its head. "Echo," he said softly. "That's your name." The dog made a quiet sound in reply, almost like agreement. Arthur smiled for the first time in years. "Echo it is." That night, for the first time since the war, Arthur Dawson slept until morning, not because he forgot the noise, but because something finally answered it. By late May, Ashford was dressed in green again. The winter scars had faded, the lake thawed, the woods alive with the hum of cicadas. Memorial Day banners fluttered along Main Street, red and blue against the morning sky. Arthur Dawson hadn't planned on joining the crowd, but somehow he found himself there, Echo at his heel, tail wagging slow and sure. It had been 6 months since the night he found the pup in the rain. Echo was no longer a trembling stray, but a strong young shepherd with a sable coat and bright amber eyes. Everywhere they went, people turned to look, not just because of Echo's proud gait, but because he always seemed to listen when someone spoke, like he understood more than a dog should. That morning, Arthur's truck rolled to a stop outside the Rusty Mug, a small cafe tucked between the hardware store and a thrift shop. The smell of roasted beans and bacon drifted through the open door. Inside, the air buzzed with conversation and the clink of mugs. Behind the counter stood Tom Beckett, a stocky man in his early 60s with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His left arm ended just below the elbow, replaced by a sleek metal prosthetic he often used to stir coffee or point at customers who hadn't tipped enough. His voice was rough but warm, the kind forged by laughter and long service. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom said as Arthur stepped in. The ghost of Ashford's finest finally crawled out of his cave. Arthur smirked. Needed caffeine more than solitude. Tom's eyes dropped to Echo. "And you brought the new recruit. What's his story again?" Arthur scratched the dog's neck. "Rescue. Found him in a crate during the storm." Tom chuckled. "Figures. 2 lost souls sharing a roof. You feeding him bacon or sermons?" "Mostly oatmeal." "That's cruelty," Tom said. "Sit down. First cup's on me." They settled into a corner booth near the window. Echo curled beside Arthur's boots, tail thumping gently. Tom brought over a plate of scrambled eggs, then leaned against the booth. "So Doc Torres tells me you've been walking around like a new man. She's right, you know. Dog's good for you." Arthur shrugged. "Or I'm good for him." Tom grinned. "Whichever keeps you breathing." Over the next few weeks, Arthur became a regular at the Rusty Mug. He never stayed long, just enough for 1 cup and quiet conversation. The other veterans, a group of gray-haired men who gathered there every morning, began to accept him again. Echo, meanwhile, stole the show. He would respond to every line of chatter with perfectly timed hums, soft barks, or even sneezes that made the table roar with laughter. "Look at that," Tom said one morning. "He's the best listener in town." Arthur smirked. "Better than most people I know." Sometimes, when a veteran spoke about the war, the light in Echo's eyes changed. He would tilt his head, emit that low rumble from deep within his chest. Not loud, but steady, grounding. Even the toughest men fell silent when they heard it. "Feels like he gets it," one said, "like he's answering you." Arthur knew the feeling too well. Memorial Day arrived bright and windy. The town gathered in the square for the annual ceremony, flags fluttering, a brass band tuning its instruments, children holding paper poppies. Maya Torres stood near the podium, helping with the wreath arrangements. She spotted Arthur and waved. "Glad you made it," she called. Arthur nodded, adjusting his jacket. "Wasn't sure I'd fit in anymore." She smiled gently. "This day isn't about fitting in, it's about remembering." The words stayed with him. The speeches began, local officials, veterans, and widows reading names of the fallen. Arthur's gaze wandered to the flags, their edges snapping in the wind. The band began playing taps. That sound, the trumpet, the slow, mournful note, pierced through the years like a knife. Suddenly it wasn't Ashford anymore. It was the desert. The heat, the grit, the blast. He was back there. Valor's bark echoing through smoke, the radio crackling, "Get down, Dawson!" The world spun. The crowd faded. A firework burst above the lake, a bright red flare, unplanned, from the kids across the field. The explosion thundered through the air. Arthur flinched hard, breath caught in his throat. The ground felt too close. His heart pounded. The trumpet merged with the echo of mortar shells. He stumbled, knocking into the bench behind him. Echo barked sharply, circling, tail down, eyes wide. "Arthur!" Maya was there in seconds, catching his arm. I can't." His voice shook. Echo pressed against his leg, whining, then let out a deep, vibrating hum. The sound cut through the chaos, not loud, but powerful. It was steady, like an anchor thrown into a storm. Arthur dropped to one knee, hand gripping Echo's fur, eyes shut tight. Slowly, his breathing synced with the dog's rhythm, in, out, steady. The world began to return, the sound of wind in flags, the soft murmur of the crowd, Maya's voice saying his name quietly, not asking anything, just reminding him he was here. When he finally stood, his shirt clung damp against his back. Echo stayed close, gaze never leaving his face. "You okay?" Maya asked softly. Arthur nodded once. "Yeah. Just forgot the war doesn't end when they tell you it's over." That evening Arthur sat by the lake, the sky glowing amber as the sun set behind the hills. Echo lay beside him, head on his knee. Maya joined them, bringing a thermos of coffee. She didn't speak for a long while, just sat watching the ripples. Finally she said, "You know, there's something special about him. He doesn't react to noise. He reacts to emotion. When someone hurts, he feels it. When someone calms, he settles. It's empathy, not fear." Arthur ran a hand along Echo's back. "You think that can be trained?" She shook her head. "No, that's something you're born with, same as loyalty." Arthur stared out at the water. "He's got Valor's eyes." Maya glanced at him. "And you've got a second chance." He gave a quiet laugh. "You sound like a therapist. I prefer animal doctor," she said with a smile. Echo lifted his head then, ears twitching at the sound of distant bells. He gave a short bark, then that familiar hum, low, resonant, as if echoing Arthur's heartbeat. Arthur looked down, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "You hear that?" he murmured. "He's saying we made it." The sun sank lower, painting the lake in gold. Arthur reached out, scratching Echo's neck. "We're still here, buddy," he said softly. "Both of us." For the first time in a decade, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful, filled with the quiet voices of those who had stayed and the echoes of those who never truly left. By early September, the woods around Ashford had begun to shift. The heat of summer softened into crisp mornings, and the first yellow leaves clung stubbornly to the trees. Arthur Dawson spent the day cleaning out the old storage shed behind his cabin, something he hadn't done in years. The floorboards groaned under his boots, dust swirling like memory in sunlight. Echo followed him everywhere, nose twitching, tail sweeping the air. The shepherd had grown into his prime now, lean, strong, eyes deep amber, like autumn light. He carried himself with quiet pride, always watching Arthur, always listening. Arthur grunted as he dragged an old footlocker from the corner. The hinges creaked open with the groan of forgotten years. Inside were fragments of a life he had buried, medals tarnished with time, folded uniforms that still smelled faintly of sand and gun oil, and a small wooden box he didn't remember keeping. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside, on a bed of faded cloth, lay a metal canine tag. The letters, though scratched, were still readable. Valor, U.S. Army. For a long time, Arthur didn't move. His breath caught, and the air thickened. The room felt smaller, the silence louder. Echo came closer, sniffing the tag before sitting down quietly beside him. Arthur turned the tag over in his palm, the edges biting gently into his skin. "You shouldn't have to see this," he murmured. "Hell, I shouldn't either." The screen door creaked behind him. "Art?" He turned to see Maya Torres, hair tied back, sleeves rolled to her elbows, holding a small basket of apples. She wore jeans and a dark red flannel, the kind of simple warmth that made her presence steady every time she appeared. "Tom said you were cleaning out ghosts today," she said, setting the basket down. "Figured you could use something that isn't canned soup." Arthur forced a faint smile. "You're 2 decades late for spring cleaning." Maya looked around the cluttered space. "You keeping all this?" "Some of it." His gaze fell to the tag again. She followed his eyes and understood instantly. "Was he yours?" Arthur nodded slowly. "Valor, my canine partner, smartest damn dogs I ever served with." "What happened?" she asked softly. He hesitated. The air seemed to press down, heavy with memory. "We were sweeping a compound near Kandahar," he began. "Valor picked up a scent. Fertilizer, detonator wire. He stopped dead, started barking. I told him to pull back. He didn't. He lunged ahead. The blast went off before I even hit the ground." His voice cracked, rough as gravel. "He saved me. But by the time I got to him," he swallowed hard, "he was gone." Maya said nothing for a long time. Then she stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder, not in pity but understanding. "You know," she said quietly, "there's a story in Mexican folklore. When a warrior dies, a loyal dog carries his soul across the river to the afterlife. But when it's the dog who dies first, he waits on the shore until his master learns how to live again." Arthur gave a shaky laugh. "You believe that?" Maya shrugged. "Belief doesn't need proof. Sometimes it just needs to help." He looked at her, eyes tired but softer. "You always talk like that." "Only on Thursdays," she said with a small grin. They stood there in silence for a while, the wind moving through the pines like a sigh. When Maya left, Arthur sat at the table, the tag still in his palm. Echo lay at his feet, eyes fixed on him, ears twitching at every small sound. The fire crackled faintly in the stove. Arthur finally spoke, voice low. "He didn't deserve that ending, you know. Valor never hesitated. Not once. I froze for half a second, and it cost him his life." Echo lifted his head, letting out a soft hum, low, resonant, like distant thunder. Arthur blinked. You sound just like him," he whispered. He leaned closer, almost afraid to breathe. He used to make that same noise before sleeping, like he was talking to himself. The sound came again, deeper this time. Arthur closed his eyes. For a moment he wasn't in his cabin, but somewhere else, a desert wind blowing through tall grass, a memory too real to be gone. He felt the sting of tears before he realized they'd fallen. "I never said goodbye," he murmured. Echo moved closer, pressing his head against Arthur's knee. The warmth of his fur bled through denim like the faint pulse of something alive that shouldn't have been. Arthur reached down, his fingers trembling, resting on the dog's head. "You're not him," he whispered, "but maybe you're his way of coming back, to make sure I don't stay stuck where he left me." Echo made a sound halfway between a whine and a sigh. The fire popped softly. Arthur set the tag down beside an old photograph, the one of him and Valor in uniform, both younger, both proud. The metal glinted in the firelight, and for a heartbeat it looked as though both dogs were there together, one in the picture, one in flesh. He whispered, "Maybe you're not here to replace him. Maybe you're here to remind me that love doesn't die. It just changes shape." Echo hummed again, a sound so deep it seemed to settle the air. Arthur wiped his eyes, laughing quietly through the ache. "You're one hell of a therapist, you know that?" The dog tilted his head, and for the first time in years, Arthur's laughter didn't sound broken. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the dust of forgotten years. Inside, a man and his dog sat beside the fire, two souls, both once lost, learning how to listen to the silence again. Winter had returned to Ashford quietly. Snow had not yet fallen, but frost clung to every fence post and window pane. The lake was a sheet of glass, and smoke from cabin chimneys twisted into the pale morning sky. For Arthur Dawson, the days had become gentler, measured not by the noise of memory, but by the steady rhythm of pause following behind him. Echo had changed the way the cabin breathed. There was life again, the clatter of food bowls, the sound of claws, clicking on old floorboards, the occasional bark at shadows that turned out to be wind. Each morning Arthur sat on the porch with his coffee while Echo rested his chin on his knee, eyes half closed, as though listening to the world's heartbeat. When December came, Maya Torres stopped by more often. She brought warm soup, books about canine behavior, and sometimes, uninvited but always welcome, company. She'd shed her professional coat for a thick brown jacket, her hair tied in a braid, cheeks flushed red from the cold. "You know," she said one morning, "I've been thinking. There's a kid who comes to the clinic sometimes, 9 years old, name's Noah Riley. Lost his dad in Iraq last year. He barely talks anymore. His mom's worried. Maybe Echo could help him." Arthur frowned. "Help him how?" Maya smiled gently. "Just be there. Echo seems to reach people in ways words can't." Arthur hesitated. He wasn't good with children. Too much silence between sentences, too many ghosts behind his eyes. But when Maya's voice softened, it was hard to say no. "All right," he said finally. "Bring him by." The next afternoon, the boy arrived with his mother. Noah was small, pale, with shaggy brown hair that fell into his eyes and a coat too big for his frame. He clung to his mother's hand until he saw Echo. Then, for the first time, his grip loosened. Echo approached carefully, head low, tail wagging slow, every step measured. He stopped a foot away, waiting. Noah crouched down without a word. The two stared at each other, the boy's eyes full of uncertainty, the dog's full of quiet knowing. Arthur stood back, arms folded, afraid to move. Noah whispered, He's big. Maya knelt beside him. You can pet him if you want. Noah hesitated, then reached out. Echo leaned forward, pressing his muzzle gently into the boy's hand. That simple touch broke something open. Noah's shoulders loosened, and he whispered, My dad had a dog too. He said dogs understand better than people. Echo gave a low rumble, the same one Arthur had heard on sleepless nights, soft, deep, like a song only hearts could hear. The boy froze, then smiled. He's talking. Arthur exhaled quietly, feeling a lump in his throat. Noah wrapped his arms around Echo's neck, whispering, I miss my dad. Echo responded with another sound, part hum, part sigh. Maya met Arthur's eyes. She didn't need to say anything. The moment spoke for itself. Later, when they left, the boy turned back and waved. Bye, Mr. Arthur. Bye, Echo. His voice was small, but brighter somehow. Arthur stood on the porch long after they disappeared down the snowy road. Echo sat beside him, tail sweeping the frost. You've got a gift, you know that? Arthur murmured. Echo tilted his head, as if unsure whether to accept the compliment. 2 days later, Maya showed up again, this time carrying her phone, grinning. You're going viral, old man. Arthur frowned. Viral? She laughed. Noah's mom filmed him with Echo and posted it on the town's Facebook group. The video's everywhere, over 500,000 views. People are calling him the dog that talks with his heart. Arthur blinked. You're kidding. Do I look like I'm kidding? She turned the screen toward him. There it was, a short clip, Noah hugging Echo, the dog humming that strange, soothing tone. The caption read, When my son said he missed his dad, this dog answered. The comments flooded below, thousands of them. I cried watching this. Faith in humanity restored. This dog is a miracle. Arthur sat down heavily, staring at the screen. He wasn't sure how to feel. Pride, fear, disbelief. People are strange, he muttered. They'll cry at a dog, but ignore a veteran on the street. Maya's voice softened. Maybe that's why they need stories like this, to remember how to feel again. He looked up at her. You think it helps? I think it already has. Over the following week, letters began arriving at Arthur's mailbox. Some typed, some handwritten, many with tear stains. People wrote from all over the country, mothers, soldiers, widows, strangers who had lost someone but found a bit of healing in Echo's voice. One read, I haven't prayed in years, but hearing your dog reminded me that love doesn't vanish when someone dies, it just changes form. Another said, My son's in the army. Please tell Echo, thank you for helping me believe he'll come home. Arthur read them all, sometimes twice. At first he thought of replying, but the words never came. Instead, he started writing in his old leather journal again, something he hadn't done since therapy. There are wounds that medicine can't touch, he wrote one night. They close only when someone listens long enough for the silence to speak. As winter deepened, Echo became somewhat of a local celebrity. Townsfolk stopped by with treats and stories. Even Tom Beckett printed a photo of Echo and pinned it behind the counter at the Rusty Mug, right next to a faded picture of his old Navy crew. See, Tom said one morning, pouring coffee. I told you he'd outrank us all one day. Arthur smiled, shaking his head. He's just a dog, Tom. Tom leaned back on his prosthetic arm, smirking. Yeah, and I'm just a guy with a metal arm and a soft spot for miracles. When Maya heard that, she laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. One evening near Christmas, Arthur sat by the fireplace, pen hovering over his journal. Outside, snow had begun to fall, flakes drifting in slow spirals through the lamplight. Echo lay on the rug, half asleep, paws twitching. Arthur wrote one final line before closing the book. Some things aren't meant to be forgotten, not because they hurt, but because they remind us what it means to feel alive. He looked down at Echo and whispered, "You did good, soldier." Echo stirred, opened one eye, and gave a soft rumble, that familiar note of comfort. Arthur smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said, "you, me, and the ghosts. We're finally making peace." The fire crackled, and outside the town glowed with Christmas lights. Inside the cabin, an old soldier and his dog sat together in the quiet, a silence not of loneliness, but of understanding. The winter storm had been howling for 3 days straight. By the time it quieted, the world outside looked remade, fences buried, roads erased, trees bowed under white weight. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low. Arthur Dawson stirred his coffee with a finger that trembled more from thought than age. Echo lay by the door, head on his paws, ears flicking at each gust that rattled the windows. It had been almost 2 months since the video went viral. Ashford had never been so full of visitors. Reporters, animal lovers, veterans, they all came looking for the miracle dog. Arthur hated the attention. Echo didn't. He greeted everyone gently, as if he understood that kindness had to start somewhere. But now a letter sat on the table. Heavy paper, official seal. Arthur had read it twice already and still couldn't make sense of it. "National Canine Behavioral Institute," he muttered. "Sounds important enough to ruin a good week." The letter requested that Echo be transferred temporarily for behavioral study to understand the neurological mechanisms behind empathy-based response in canines. The words felt sterile, surgical, like something written by people who had never looked into a dog's eyes and seen a soul staring back. When Maya arrived later that morning, snow dusting her coat, Arthur handed her the letter. She read it in silence, lips pressed tight. "They can't force it," she said finally. "You're his registered guardian." "Maybe not, but they'll come knocking." Maya looked up. "You think they'd take him?" Arthur sighed. "They won't drag him off in chains, but they'll talk, they'll promise grants, research, helping the species. And before you know it, he's behind glass, wired up to machines." He rubbed his temple. "He's not an experiment." Maya nodded. "Then we fight it." He smiled faintly. "You always make it sound easy." "It isn't," she said, "but the right things never are." 2 nights later, the blizzard returned. Wind screamed through the valley, tearing snow from the earth like sand. Power lines swayed, lights flickered, then went dark. Ashford fell silent except for the storm's fury. Arthur sat near the fire, half listening to the radio's emergency updates. Local authorities advise residents to remain indoors. Search team delayed due to 0 visibility. He reached for another log when Echo suddenly lifted his head. The dog's ears pricked sharply, eyes fixed on the window. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not warning, but alert. Arthur frowned. "What is it?" Echo stood, pacing toward the door, whining softly, then barking once, deep, urgent. He pawed at the handle. "You want out in this?" Arthur muttered. Echo barked again, louder. Then came something else. Faint, almost drowned by the storm. A sound. High, distant, thin as thread. The cry of a child. Arthur froze. "No, grabbed his coat and flashlight. "You better be right, soldier." They stepped into chaos. Snow whipped at their faces, erasing shapes into ghostly white. Echo moved like a compass, nose to the wind, tail stiff. Arthur followed, boots sinking deep. The cold cut through his jacket, but he didn't slow. After 20 minutes of trudging, they reached the tree line. The sound came again, weak, desperate. Echo barked once, then darted toward the forest. Arthur cursed, stumbling after him. The flashlight beam caught movement, a small figure huddled near a fallen trunk, wrapped in a torn pink parka. A girl, maybe 7 or 8. She was shivering violently, lips blue, half buried under snow. Arthur dropped to his knees. Hey, sweetheart, you're okay." He peeled off his gloves, checked her pulse. Faint, but there. Echo pressed against the child, his body heat radiating through her soaked clothes. Arthur tore off his scarf, wrapping it around her face. "Stay with me, kid," he murmured. He keyed the radio. "This is Dawson, up by Timber Hollow. I've got a lost child, hypothermic but alive. Need med evac now." Static hissed. No reply. The storm swallowed the signal. Echo whimpered, looking up at him. Arthur cursed under his breath. "All right. Looks like it's on us." He lifted the girl into his arms, her weight barely more than a memory. "Lead the way, Echo." The dog barked once, then trotted ahead, glancing back every few steps to make sure they followed. The trail back was nearly invisible. Twice Arthur stumbled, nearly falling, but Echo would circle back, nudge his leg, keep him upright. By the time the cabin lights appeared through the snow, Arthur's arms were numb. He kicked open the door, laid the girl by the fire, and wrapped her in blankets. Echo curled beside her, refusing to move. Maya arrived an hour later with the sheriff and 2 EMTs. Her face was pale when she saw the child breathing. "You found her?" Arthur nodded. He did. He gestured toward Echo, whose fur was still wet, eyes half closed, but alert. The sheriff, Nora McAdams, a tall black woman in her 40s with calm authority and a streak of silver through her hair, crouched beside the dog. "That's one hell of a rescue, boy," she said softly. Then to Arthur, "How'd you even know where to look?" Arthur looked down at Echo. He heard her. "Through a blizzard?" Arthur nodded once. "Through everything." The next morning, the news spread faster than the storm. Veteran and his dog save missing girl in blizzard. TV crews called. Reporters wrote headlines about the miracle of Ashford. The National Canine Institute withdrew their request. They called Arthur personally, said they would respect the emotional bond, and study the story instead of the dog. When the chaos died down, Sheriff Nora stopped by to return Arthur's scarf. "She's gonna make it," she said. "The doctors say the dog's warmth probably kept her alive." Arthur smiled faintly. "Guess he's earning his keep." Nora studied him. "You know, people talk about empathy like it's science, but I think it's simpler than that." "How so?" She smiled. "That dog of yours just remembers what we forget, to care when it's cold." Arthur looked at Echo, lying by the fire, tail sweeping slowly. "Yeah," he said softly, "he remembers." When Nora left, the cabin felt quieter, but not empty. Arthur knelt beside Echo, scratching his ear. "You saved her life, soldier. And maybe mine, too." Echo gave a low rumble, leaning into his touch. Arthur chuckled. "Yeah, message received." Outside, the snow had stopped. The world was white, clean, still. Inside, the man and the dog sat together, their breath fogging the window glass. For the first time in years, Arthur didn't feel haunted. He felt present. And when Echo lifted his head, gazing out into the silent, shining world, Arthur whispered, "We're home now." A year had passed since the blizzard, and the world, in its quiet way, had begun to mend. The town of Ashford, once a sleepy cluster of brick and pine, now carried a new rhythm. There was laughter outside the old lumber yard, fresh paint on the diner sign, and the faint sound of hammers echoing from the edge of town, where something new was being built. Arthur Dawson stood at the gate, a wooden sign freshly hung above him. Echo's Camp, Healing Hearts, one paw at a time. The letters were carved by hand, slightly uneven, but honest, like the man himself. The camp stretched across 5 acres of meadow bordered by tall evergreens. Small cabins dotted the property, each with smoke curling gently from its chimney. In the center stood a red barn-turned shelter, its doors flung open to reveal hay bales, blankets, and the soft hum of rescued animals. Dogs, cats, even an old horse named Marlowe that Tom had somehow borrowed from a neighbor. Tom Beckett, sturdy as ever, and now wearing a sheriff-style hat purely for humor, waved from the porch. "You're late, Art. The veterans are showing up any minute, and your star employee is busy stealing the spotlight again." Arthur followed his gaze. Near the entrance, Echo was surrounded by a cluster of children, tails wagging, tongues laughing, paws resting gently on small knees. He sat still as a saint, letting the kids braid ribbons into his collar. Arthur shook his head. "He's never late for duty." Tom chuckled. "Neither were you back in the day. Guess he learned from the best." Arthur smiled, faint but real. "He learned to listen. I just learned to stop running." From the main cabin, Maya Torres emerged, clipboard in hand, cheeks flushed by the wind. Her dark braid brushed against the collar of her olive jacket. "We've got 10 veterans coming this week," she said, scanning the list. 2 with service dogs, 3 starting therapy, and 1 retired firefighter who says he doesn't like dogs, which means Echo will love him the most. Arthur laughed. "That's how it always goes." Maya looked at him then, eyes soft. "I still remember the first day I saw you at the clinic. You looked like someone who'd stopped believing there was such a thing as tomorrow." Arthur met her gaze, malbaissé, "And you looked like someone who'd seen too many tomorrows without resting." She smiled. "Guess we both found our middle ground." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the group arrive. Men and women in their 50s, 60s, a few younger faces too. Some walked with canes, some carried shadows heavier than their packs. Each was greeted by Tom's booming laugh, Maya's calm welcome, and Echo's tail thumping softly in the dirt. Arthur moved among them, shaking hands, offering quiet nods. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The camp wasn't built for speeches. It was built for silence, for the kind of peace that grows only when someone finally listens. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low, they gathered by the fire pit. Maya brewed coffee, Tom roasted marshmallows, badly, and Echo lay between Arthur's boots, watching the flames. One of the veterans, Earl Jennings, a lanky man with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen too much desert, asked, "So what's the story with this place?" Arthur poked at the fire, sparks rising like fireflies. "It started with a storm," he said, "and a dog that refused to stay silent." Earl nodded slowly. "You ever think about going back? To the army, I mean, helping out the younger guys?" Arthur shook his head. "I used to think I left my purpose in the sand with my old canine partner. But then Echo showed up and proved me wrong." He looked down at the dog. "Turns out, purpose doesn't die. It just changes its voice." The group sat in quiet understanding. Echo's soft hum rose again, vibrating through the stillness. The veterans smiled, some wiping eyes they pretended weren't watering. Later that evening, when the camp had quieted and stars blanketed the sky, Arthur sat on the porch alone. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and smoke. Echo sat beside him, head resting on his knee. "You remember Valor, boy," Arthur whispered. "I used to think I owed him my life, but I was wrong. I owed him living it." He looked out across the meadow, where lanterns glowed faintly like fallen stars. "You helped me do that." Echo made that deep, familiar rumble, the one that wasn't quite a bark, more a sound of understanding. Arthur chuckled softly. "You always know what to say." From the cabin window behind him, Maya's voice drifted out, soft, singing a lullaby to one of the rescue dogs still afraid of thunder. Her voice mingled with the wind, blending warmth into the cold night. Arthur picked up his journal, the same one he'd been writing in since the day Echo came into his life. The pages were filled with scrawled notes, stories, letters he never sent. He turned to the last blank page and began to write. Valor taught me how to survive. Echo taught me how to live. He paused, then added, maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to leave behind a sound that keeps echoing in someone else's heart. He closed the book gently, placed it beside him, and leaned back. Echo shifted closer, tail brushing his boot. In the distance, laughter floated from the campfire. Real laughter, the kind that breaks chains instead of silence. Somewhere in that sound was the future, one built not on war or pain, but on the fragile, stubborn hope that kindness could still heal. As the last light of day faded, Arthur looked toward the horizon, where the pines swayed against the dying sun. "Come on, Echo," he murmured. "Time to check on our guests." They rose together, Titul, an old soldier and his loyal dog, and walked into the glow of the gate. Firelight. Echo's hum rose again, soft and deep, blending with the wind like a prayer. And for once, Arthur didn't hear ghosts. He heard peace. There are moments in life when we think God has stopped speaking to us, when silence feels endless and every prayer seems unanswered, but sometimes He doesn't answer with words. He sends something smaller, quieter, yet more powerful than we could ever imagine. A loyal friend, a second chance, a heartbeat beside ours reminding us, you were never forgotten. Arthur thought he'd lost everything that mattered, but through the soft voice of a dog's heart, through Echo, he discovered that even in the quiet, God still whispers. Sometimes through storms, sometimes through the warmth of fur pressed against a trembling hand, and sometimes through love that comes back in a different form. If you believe that miracles still walk this earth, on four paws, with hearts made of light, then share this story. Leave a comment to tell us what you're thankful for today. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe and join us. Because somewhere out there, another lost soul is waiting to hear that they are loved. May God bless you, keep you safe, and remind you that no matter how far you've fallen, He still sends His messengers, sometimes with a bark instead of wings.